lifted themselves up in my life, I turned around and realized I had no support system. All my closest friends from Guilford College had left after graduation, and distance changed the nature of those relationships significantly. I couldn't count on that anymore. Those were the same friends with whom I talked about whiteness, shame, multiculturalism, diversity, and movement building. I found myself spending time with my neighbors, white and not always covert about their racism, although they would vehemently deny that jokes about Mexican immigrants are racist. Why couldn't I catch myself on the support offered by Greensboro's burgeoning Black Lives Matter movement, full of people of color and white allies committed to change and building compassionate communities? To find the answers, I would have to look further back in my life and my deeper identity.
I'm dedicating my part of today's talk to Sandra Bland. A few days ago, she was picked up for incorrect signaling, was arrested, was in jail, and now the jailers have said that she has committed suicide. I don't believe it. This is for you. In December, I gave a talk here about my early exposure to this movement. I told about my own discomfort at being in new and different situations. I told about being confronted with my own assumptions and biases and how sometimes I'd rather not be there. I'm telling you that sometimes I want to throw in the towel. I want to stop caring. And then another horrific incident happens. And I am once again reminded of the world that we live in, a world where a 21-year-old man goes into a black church, sits down with the church members for an hour, and then kills 9 of them. The night this happened, I saw on my Facebook feed that there was a shooting in Charleston, and I have to admit that my first thought was, another shooting, and I went to bed. This is the situation where we're in, my friends, where we can have another shooting, and I brush it off as just one more shooting. The next morning, I woke up to the reality and a more complete picture of what happened, and I cried. Sitting on the edge of my bed, I cried for the families, and I cried for our world. That Thursday night, I, along with many of you, attended a church service at Bethel African Methodist Episcopal Church. We UUs were in a place where people who have a very different theology than us. But we were able to be there to reach beyond our differences and see our common humanity. At the end of the service, there was an altar call. Now, at the church I grew up in, an altar call meant that you come to the front and you accept Jesus in your heart. So I was nervous. But then I saw that everyone in the room was going to the front. I thought, surely not all these people need to have Jesus in their heart now. We all looked at each other and decided to go up to the front. We went up to the dais, held hands with the other service attendees, and we sang Amazing Grace. We prayed, and we sang, and we cried, and we hugged. Over and over, the members of Bethel AME thanked us. They thanked us, a bunch of white members of UCG, for being there. We showed up. We felt our own pain, and we empathized with theirs. I was so humbled by their gratitude that we showed up. Never, ever underestimate the power of being there.
As a young white man, my life was shaped by the violence of racialization in contemporary society. Our schools are cultural indoctrinators. We learn how to act around our peers, whom to listen to and take messages of authority from. My first memory of experiencing racial difference was in school, although it was undoubtedly not the first time that I was exposed to racial difference. Just the first time I remembered because it was public and somehow humiliating. I gave a presentation in 5th grade about Thurgood Marshall, the first African-American Supreme Court Justice, and said that without him, some of our friends might not be here. And I named a black classmate. There was a strange moment, because in front of the whole class, I had just named an unspoken difference, a truth that was not meant to be said by 5th graders. How do we connect all across racial differences? What keeps us separated? And was I guilty of creating separation? Was I a part? An 11-year-old needs help with those questions. A 24-year-old needs help with those questions, and so does a 40-year-old or a 70-year-old. But I didn't get help. Our schools and youth programs are generally not effective at building compassionate communities. Yes, even the good Montessori school that my white liberal parents could afford to send me to. At summer camp, being harassed by other white kids about speaking with a lisp is my first memory of heteronormalization. I tell you this to say that from the beginning, we are part of a society that enforces these normals. As well-meaning as most of the dedicated, compassionate people who work with young folks are, these institutions are an engine for normalization. It becomes normal to see racialized groups of kids sitting together in the cafeteria. Whether we notice or not, it becomes normal to see teachers giving preference to the raised hands of white students over those of Black and Latino students. And eventually, the kids indoctrinated in these schools become employers who unconsciously filter job applications by who has a white-sounding name. The research proves it. And my experience, as traumatic as it may have been, was the experience of a privileged individual, an individual whom the culture wishes to bring in rather than an individual who faces the greater violence of marginalization and exclusion. Perhaps that was why I wasn't ready to fall back on the support of the Black Lives Matter movement in December, why I wasn't really ready to be a dedicated and authentic anti-racist ally is because I had never truly confronted my past, my shame at being a part of this culture. Any racially charged incident, such as a shooting in Charleston, the murder of a young Black man in the streets of Missouri, forces me to confront my privileged identity. But to be an effective interrupter, I would have to be intentional about exploring my identity every day, about bringing it with me to every situation, not just after tragic events.
2 days after the Charleston shooting, on Friday night, I found myself in another AME church, this one Trinity AME. This time with the local Black Lives Matter movement. Through the Black Lives Matter movement, my vocabulary is being expanded. I'm learning to do things like take up less space, decenter whiteness. I'm learning about respectability politics and changing the narrative. I'm becoming aware of how much I don't know. Before November, I had never heard the term white supremacy. If I did, I applied it to the KKK, not to systems in our culture, and certainly not to systems that I personally benefited from. I had heard of this concept called white privilege, but had no real idea of how it applied to me and my life. I'm learning that I never knew the words white supremacy simply because I have white privilege. I'm learning to question my assumptions and be open to stories and learn from others in ways I never considered before. That night at Trinity AME, we prayed, we called on the ancestors, Byron Rustin, Ida B. Wells, Audre Lorde, among others. We drummed and we chanted. The pain of the last few days came up and through us while we were there with each other in ways that are hard to articulate. What I can say is that the connections are real. The ways I am being challenged to live my values as a Unitarian Universalist are real, and I am committed to the process. Tim and I come to you as people on the journey, not people with answers. I personally come to you to plead my ignorance and say that I'm learning and continuing to learn about systems of racism and how they work in our society.
As a student at Guilford College, we learned about systems of racism. Oh, that was an important buzzword, systems. About how an oppressive culture affects everyone, both the oppressed and the privileged individuals. But I had never really unpacked that. How do Anglo-European people, with all the privileges that come among living in a Eurocentric culture, suffer from violence? I had a loose sense that this had to do with the psychological phenomenon called cognitive dissonance. It wasn't until my senior year that an amazing individual, Jada Drew, who at the time was the co-director of the Multicultural Education Department, told me that I didn't know as much as I thought I knew. Looking back, that was a piece of advice I should have taken and run farther with, going deeper into learning more about myself and my white identity. At the end of one invigorating meeting with Black Lives Matter organizers and supporters, I got into a conversation where I was checked on my privilege. What did I really think about being a young white man who 2 years out of college got a great job with benefits, living in a historically low-income neighborhood? What was I really doing here? While I don't think he intended to shame me, and he wasn't attacking who I was as a person, I felt ashamed. Being called out on privilege can always bring out a sense of shame because so much of our identity is wrapped up in that privilege. More so, I felt stupid because now it was public and clear that I didn't know as much as I tried to present. Did that shame prevent me from engaging with the fierce activists with whom I had been close a year before, interning at the beloved community center around the safer cause of voter turnout? Maybe. Was it depression, worse than I had experienced since middle school? Maybe. The new and greater than expected challenges of balancing work and life at my first full-time job? Maybe. Part of white people working with people of color for justice to dismantle the systems of white supremacy from which we benefit outwardly is the recognition that we don't know as much as we think we do. The acceptance that we may not always be articulate about our feelings, about the answers to these questions that are not succinct or cut and dry. And this sermon will not provide the answers. Sorry to say. The answers are in holding each other accountable, but also in laughing, in healing each other, seeking therapy alone or in groups, grieving together and forgiving each other and ourselves. I know that I can fall back on this community for help searching for transformative experiences, for support in sorrow, for happiness in joy. Transformation looks like organizations that work to empower youth in schools with messages of anti-racism, anti-homophobia, and the tools to stand up against bias. Transformation looks like white people attending meetings organized by people of color and lending their support. It means saying Black Lives Matter. Transformation looks like challenging oppressive systems, and sometimes it doesn't feel comfortable.
Recently, I was in a conversation with my friend April Parker, who is a local leader of the Black Lives Matter movement. She had several criticisms against the mainstream gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender organizations, one of which is this: is their work transformative? Our lives being transformed? Our communities being transformed? That really struck with me because as a leader in our church, I have a strong investment in our church being an agent for transformation. It got me wondering if we actually are. Our governance structure is based on a book written by Dan Hotchkiss called Governance and Ministry. In the end of the book, after lots of explanations about policies, why we have them, and things that only a governance geek cares about, he breaks it down like this: churches, whatever denomination they are, no matter how we practice our faith, should be about the work of transformation. That's really all it comes down to. If I am personally not being transformed, if our church is not transforming lives in our community, what are we doing? The Black Lives Matter movement, as little as I've been involved in it, has transformed me. It has made me a more conscious and aware person about many issues, including race. And I can honestly say that this church has transformed me as well. So my next question was, what are we as a church doing to transform both ourselves and our community? If you're thinking, what in the world could I possibly do? Racism is huge, massive, and we feel like we're just nothing, like pushing a rock up a mountain. But here's one thing you can do. You can become a card-carrying member of the North Carolina NAACP. That's easy. I'm going to a meeting tonight. Y'all can join me. Talk to me afterwards. They would love to have you, and there are many, many organizations doing this work. Come talk to us. We would be happy to help get that work going here. There are ways that we can be involved. You can also address comments you hear at work, at the grocery store, in your own head. Internalized racism is real. This is the world we're living in. This is the air we're breathing. It is real. You can learn to question your own assumptions. You can be willing to learn, and you can be willing to serve. You can join me and Tim in reading Reverend Thandika's book, Learning to Be White. You can come to our meeting next Tuesday, July 28th.
The other day at work, a colleague of mine said, "Wow, I feel really bad that I can't come to Winston-Salem this evening for that voting rights rally." And what I thought of and what we talked about is that coming to and showing up at the voting rights rally in spaces organized by people of color leading the way, that's important. That's transformation. But this is also what transformation looks like. Talking at a micro level with your colleagues and your peers about standing on the side of love, about racism and privilege and being an ally. Transformation looks like two white people being willing to talk about their uncomfortable experiences, being vulnerable with a community of support, this congregation, and saying, let's go on this journey together. Transformation is my journey in learning why it's important to say Black Lives Matter in this moment. Can anyone articulate that? I've learned to say that it's important to affirm the dignity and value of all lives. Our first UU principle is exactly about that. But to say Black Lives Matter is more political. It's to recognize that in this moment, something needs to change in 2015 in America. To say that I'm ready to be transformed and to behave in transformative ways. Are you willing to be transformed?
If you're willing to be transformed, I would like you to consider joining the choir in a chant, Black Lives Matter. They're going to begin, and then as you feel so moved, you can join in just saying it over and over again, Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter. Black Lives
Black lives matter. 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 Black lives matter.
Can you go to the first one? Thank you for your patience. And thank you, Tim and Richard, my new friend, for helping out with our tech issues.
Why am I know how to do this?
Yeah, just go to this.
Just hit F5.
F5. Yeah, I don't know what these are. But I don't want it to please. All right. Thank you. Right. Okay, so we're going to end with doing this chant, our benediction, and then one more chant to end with. And the choir has already been prepped, so they're going to be helping you out. So, and I'm going to read the first couple of lines, and then the choir is going to jump in. We're going to read through the first part twice, and then go on to the next part. This is the chorus, and then we're going to be going back up to the top again twice through. Are you ready? Can we do this? That's right. What side are you on, my people? What side are you on?
On the freedom side.
What side are you on, my people? What side are you on?
On the freedom side.
Willard Rustin was a freedom fighter, and he taught us how to fight. So we will fight all day and night until we get it right. What side are you on, my people? What side are you on?
On the freedom side.
What side are you on, my people? What side are you on?
On the freedom side.
James Reed was a freedom fighter, and he taught us how to fight. So we will fight all day and night until we get it right. What side are you on, my people? What side are you on?
I'm on the freedom side.
What side are you on, my people? What side are you on?
I'm on the freedom side.
Audre Lorde was a freedom fighter, and she taught us how to fight. So we will fight all day and night until we get it right. What side are you on, my people? What side are you on?
I'm on the freedom side.
What side are you on, my people? What side are you on?
I'm on the freedom side.
Sojourner Truth was a freedom fighter, and she taught us how to fight. So we will fight all day and night until we get it right. What side are you on, my people? What side are you on?
I'm on the freedom side.
What side are you on, my people? What side are you on?
I'm on the freedom side.
Rosa Parks was a freedom fighter, and she taught us how to fight. So we will fight all day and night until we get it right. What side are you on, my people? What side are you on?
I'm on the freedom side.
What side are you on, my people? What side are you on?
I'm on the freedom side.
Bree Newsom was a freedom fighter, and she taught us how to fight. So we will fight all day and night until we get it right. Take a minute. What side are you on, my people? What side are you on?
I'm on the freedom side.
What side are you on, my people? What side are you on?
I'm on the freedom side.
All right, thank you. So then you could put in anybody's name because we're all freedom fighters. So think of like past, present. Think of who inspires you. We stand on the shoulders of people who came before. So our benediction is, may we be the people who show up. May we be ever and always standing on the side of love.
May we be necessary interrupters in corrupt systems, and may we love each other and support each other. We have nothing to lose but our chains.
And then finally, ain't no power like the power of the people, because the power of the people don't stop.
Say what?
Ain't no power like the power of the people, because the power of the people don't stop.
Say what?
Ain't no power like the power of the people, because the power of the people don't stop.
Say what?
Ain't no power like the power of the people, 'cause the power of the people don't stop.
Say what?
Ain't no